You found a clinical supervisor who can supervise you toward licensure. If you've been looking for a while, you know that's a start and an important one because it can be hard to even connect with options. Supervision availability is hard to come by, and many of us have a story or know someone who has a story about what happens when that minimum isn't even met, like with unreliable availability or someone who isn't clear on or doesn't meet the requirements. So, yes, securing the hours is important, but the bar is literally on the floor, and modality fit matters too. Chances are that you have a modality in mind that you'd like to learn more about, or maybe you've wondered at some point if your sessions are even really doing what they could be. So, meeting with someone whose clinical expertise you really understand and value is really important too. And, there was a time that we didn't really have that option. When I was finishing with grad school almost 20 years ago, we found a job and were hired at said job. And then after that process was completed, only then would we generally meet our future and prospective clinical supervisor. So it wasn't entirely uncommon to start a role and not even know who you'd be working with, what their licensure was. And sometimes that was a problem too, because you would be maybe promised at the time of interview a type of supervision with a licensure that no longer existed at that place or wasn't going to be available in the same way that the interviewer thought it might be. Imagine for a second that you can find the two things we mentioned, clinical prowess and reliability, because most supervisees, if they find those two things, they stop right there, and understandably so. If they find someone available, confirm that there's an overlap with the modality the supervisee is interested in and that the supervisor uses or is an expert in, and they assume the rest will work itself out. And from there, sometimes you actually do finish your hours and get your clinical license and realize that the supervisory relationship shaped how you think about yourself as a clinician, but maybe not even in the direction you needed it to. I built a supervisor directory for my local area this year, and supervisees in my region can use it to match with a supervisor who will be a good fit. And building it has really made me think hard about what we actually evaluate when we choose someone to help us become the clinician we're going to be. I've been thinking a lot about what blanks do I need supervisors who join the directory to fill in, and what are some of the filters that supervisees are going to find to be really important as they're selecting someone. I just thought of another one while I was recording this. But it's really interesting to see how supervisors differentiate themselves and what would be meaningful to supervisees, because in the position where they just are so eager to work toward their license, finding someone available in some cases is really all that they want. And that's what this episode is all about. I'm Lorain Moorhead, and this is Self Careapist Therapist. Imagine all of that falls into place. You complete your hours, you get licensed, but something feels unusual about who you became in that room. A supervisor who never challenged your conceptualization and maybe only talked about your documentation. A supervisor whose theoretical lens started to become the only lens that you used or thought through because that's how you were talking about it. And a common one, a supervisor who doesn't notice the you in sessions and help you see how you're impacted or how you're impacting. I think, again, with the change in how supervision is able to be provided, there are two different opportunities. Sometimes if it's your employer who's also your clinical supervisor, they might have a hard line about how much of you is able to show up in your supervisory sessions. I've heard that before. And if it's an external supervisor, maybe there's a way to carve out more, which I think can be really valuable. But I think it can be really valuable to hear the link between when I see this type of clients, this age, this demographic, I feel myself feeling like I'm less effective, and really exploring beyond that conversation what's coming up for you, maybe viewing some videos with client permission or transcripts with client permission to really imagine where else those conversations could go and what the belief is that's limiting the impact of those conversations. A prompt I use sometimes is, what are you actually describing? Just notice it when you say a supervisor was fine. And often it's, they showed up for our meetings and they signed off at the end. Or better yet, they signed off at the end without too much back and forth and fairly quickly. It might interest you to hear what the research actually says about what actually predicts supervisee development. Watkins from 2011 discusses that the supervisory working alliance is the strongest predictor of supervisee outcome, stronger than even the supervisor experience level or a shared modality. So the alliance that they form becomes the strongest predictor. And the three components of supervisory alliance are agreement on goals, agreement on tasks, and the quality of the relational bond. Modality and hours don't touch any of those directly. And the supervision relationship is sort of a parallel process to the therapeutic relationship. The safety and trust and even organizational style and timing of a supervision session can look a lot like a therapy session. The boundaries that you implement in one, you'll begin to implement in another. The same things that make therapy work make supervision work. Attunement, rupture repair, and room for the supervisee's own clinical voice and meeting them where they are, to name a few. About 3/4 of the way into my pre-licensure journey, it was sort of a defeating time in supervision, and I happened to be matched with a phenomenal supervisor. I was so lucky that the supervisor I was placed with actually had the word kind in her last name and totally lived by that every day. But what made her really remarkable and really stand out at that point in my journey is that even though she prioritized, of course, ethics, documentations, all of the things that we know are so important, even for the protection and advancement of our clients, she also prioritized the relationship with her supervisees as well as the importance of clinical conversations too, not just talking about what's going wrong or what's coming up, but actually making sure that even the sessions that were going well, we had a place to check in about those, about the conceptualization, about the plan, what we would like to see, and what our client was working toward, and just light conversations about what interventions and modalities could help them get there. It seems strange to say, but having those conversations really stood out to me because I hadn't had a lot of opportunities to have conversations like that in supervision before. I want to just take a minute to say, I think being hired or working as an employee in this field is really important too. You being in this field is very important, and I don't think there's a right way to do it. I think sometimes there can be misalignments. I don't think by any means that everyone needs to go interview supervisors if that's not the path that you've laid out. I think your path is perfect. That being said, if you do find yourself in a position to be interviewing supervisors, here are some questions to get you started thinking about what you might want to know, what you might want to bring to the table as you're deciding on the right fit. Number 1, how do you structure supervision? How much documentation and ethics versus clinical awareness do you incorporate psychoeducation? I know many supervisors wait to have the supervisee bring their sessions that they want to discuss into supervision. And I think it can also be valuable in group supervision or individual if there's also some things that the supervisor is incorporating that might not be discussed unless they're brought up. So in addition to, of course, the ethics and the documentation, is there something that you wish you would have learned early in your career that you figured out later? Those are great topics for the supervisor to bring into discussions with their supervisee. A method that you incorporate that you wish you would have learned earlier or that no one told you, but you figured it out. A book that you read and the standout points and how it's helping you. No one method is for everyone, but you might inquire about how much of one or the other your supervisor tends to bring in. What does rupture look like in your supervision relationships and how do you work through it? What are some strategies or methods? Is there anything in your informed consent that kind of gives a path forward if there is a rupture? How much room do you make for a supervisee's self? How much are they able to talk about their personal reactions or the issues that they have going on or how they're navigating them? Because if something's going on, it's going to inevitably make its way into the therapy room in one way or another. What are some things supervisees have appreciated learning from you? Think about writing these down and reflecting on your own values in terms of what would make a supervisory relationship really valuable to you. And then if there are any questions on my list that aren't important to you, cross them off and think of a question that would tap into a personal value that you have. When you imagine coming to the end of what promises to be a relatively long-term relationship, I mean, you have friends that you don't get to spend an hour a week with. Think about what could come out of a pretty important relationship like that and what would give it value to you. And then think of your own questions. If you're pre-licensed right now, you might have more leverage than you think. There is a scarcity mindset around supervision, but it shouldn't be the only thing driving the decision. And if you're already a supervisor, these questions are worth sitting with for you in the other direction. Are you building the kind of relationship where your supervisee could tell you they disagree? I mentioned earlier that I built a directory for clinicians in my local area who want to find a supervisor with specific qualities, not just availability, although that is a great place to start. I'll link that in the show notes. Right now, it's for Arizonans specifically, and it's specifically for external supervisors or supervised private practice. But if you would hope to get your agency listed on it, in terms of clinicians they'll be hiring, shoot me a quick message or email and let me know that interest is there because I'm thinking about a way to equitably allow that to in a different way in the directory. You are going to spend, again, hundreds of hours with this person at the most formative stage in your clinical identity, some might argue. And simply getting your hours are the baseline. That being said, if you're not getting your hours, keep that in mind. That should be the baseline. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a pre-licensed clinician in your network. See you next time.